Your IQ is not fixed. Not at 20, not at 40, not at 60. The greatest minds in history knew it before anyone could explain why. Einstein failed his university entrance exam. Darwin's own father called him a disgrace. Tesla arrived in America with 4 cents in his pocket and a head full of ideas nobody believed in yet. These are not stories about people who were born exceptional. These are stories about people who became exceptional. The difference wasn't inherited, it was built. 10 specific habits. Here they are. Habit 1. Think without input. Albert Einstein was 16 years old when he asked himself a question that would eventually rewrite physics. What would it look like to chase a beam of light? Not calculate, not research, not consult anyone, just imagine. He walked alone for hours through the streets of his town, with no books, no notes, no external information of any kind, just the question and his own mind working on it. A decade later, that single thought experiment became the foundation of the special theory of relativity. Neuroscience now has a name for what Einstein was activating during those walks: the default mode network. The brain system that engages not when you are consuming information, but when you are doing absolutely nothing useful by modern standards. Sitting with a thought, staring out a window, walking without anything in your ears. Most people treat this state the way they treat a buffering screen. Something has gone wrong, and it needs to be fixed immediately. The modern world has declared war on silence. Every idle moment is now an opportunity to consume something. Another video, another article, another notification. Einstein didn't have a smartphone, which is probably why he could think. Your brain gets smarter in the silence, not in the noise. The habit is a daily thinking walk. No phone, no music, no input, just you and a question you care about. The discomfort in the first 10 minutes is not boredom. It is your brain switching modes. That discomfort is the point. And it connects directly to what the second habit reveals about something most people get completely backwards about how intelligence grows. Habit 2. Struggle before you seek help. Benjamin Franklin wanted to become a great writer. No formal education, no teacher, no writing program. So he invented his own method. He would find an essay he admired, read it carefully, then put it away. Days later, he would sit down and attempt to reconstruct it entirely from memory. Not copy it, reconstruct it. Then he would compare what he had written to the original and note every place his version fell short, every gap in vocabulary, every collapse in logic, every argument that sounded right in his head and looked embarrassingly thin on paper. He did this for years. What Franklin understood and what psychologists now call productive struggle is simple. Your brain strengthens through the attempt, not through the answer. This is why watching someone else solve a problem feels so satisfying and teaches you almost nothing. Your brain got the dopamine hit without doing any of the work. It is essentially a cognitive free rider. The modern world has perfected this system. Every answer is one search away. Every solution is one click away. The gap between not knowing and knowing has never been shorter, and your brain has never had less reason to actually grow. The habit is this: before you search, before you ask, before you look it up, write your best attempt first, even if it is wrong, especially if it is wrong. Your brain upgrades itself in the gap between what you know and what you are trying to know. Close that gap too quickly, and the upgrade never happens. Da Vinci understood this better than almost anyone, and he took it somewhere most people never think to look. Habit 3. Write to think, not to remember. If you have ever seen photographs of Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, you will notice something immediately. They are not organized. They are not the color-coded, productivity-optimized, perfectly structured journals that every self-improvement influencer tells you to keep. They are chaos. Questions that go nowhere. Diagrams that contradict each other. Half-finished ideas sitting next to observations about birds, sitting next to notes on water flow, sitting next to a sketch of a human face. Da Vinci was not writing to record what he already knew. He was writing to find out what he thought. Those are not the same thing. Writing to record is transcription. You already know it, and you are putting it somewhere for storage. Writing to think is something else entirely. It forces your brain to slow down enough to find the gaps, the inconsistencies, the questions you didn't know you had until you tried to put the idea into words and discovered it wasn't actually an idea yet. It was just a feeling with ambitions. Research from Princeton and UCLA confirms what Da Vinci practiced intuitively. Writing by hand improves conceptual understanding significantly more than typing or passive reading, because it requires your brain to compress rather than simply transfer. The habit is a daily thinking journal. Not, what did I do today? What do I actually understand? What confused me? What idea feels unfinished? Intelligence doesn't grow where information is collected. It grows where thinking is examined. And Feynman took that one step further in a way that changes how your brain works across every area of your life simultaneously. Habit 4. Keep a set of open questions. Richard Feynman won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1965. He was also an amateur safecracker, a bongo drummer, and genuinely one of the strangest and most curious human beings of the 20th century. His curiosity wasn't random, though. It was structured. Feynman kept what he called his 12 favorite problems, a set of open questions he carried in the back of his mind at all times. When a new idea crossed his path, a paper, a conversation, something overheard at a bar, he would immediately test it against his 12 problems. Does this help me crack any of these? If yes, he went deeper. If not, he moved on. Most people collect information the way they collect unread emails, convinced it will be useful someday. Feynman filtered everything through a specific set of questions that mattered to him. That filtering is what researchers call transfer intelligence, the ability to apply what you know from one domain to a problem in a completely different one. It is one of the most reliable markers of high fluid intelligence, and it develops specifically through learning wide, not just deep. Modern education says pick a field and go deep. Feynman says go deep in your field and then keep going in every other direction. Every week, learn one concept outside your area, not deeply, conceptually. Your brain becomes more intelligent not when it knows more things, but when it has more ways to connect what it knows. The first 4 habits are about how you think. The next 5 are about something most people never consider: how you treat the mind doing the thinking. Habit 5. Train your memory deliberately. Nikola Tesla could build an invention entirely inside his mind. Not sketch it, not prototype it, build it. He would construct the complete 3-dimensional object in his imagination, rotate it, stress test individual components, identify design flaws, and make corrections, all before a single physical part was manufactured. His colleagues thought this was eccentric. Neuroscience now knows it was optimal. Because memory and intelligence are not separate systems, memory is the substrate on which intelligence operates. Tesla wasn't running a better brain, he was running a better trained one. The difference matters more than most people realize. Most people treat memory as something that happens to them. They remember things or they don't. They forget things or they don't. Tesla treated memory as something he built, deliberately, systematically, the same way he built everything else. The techniques that develop this kind of memory are not complicated, but they share one characteristic that makes them deeply unpopular. They require your brain to work rather than receive. Retrieving information without looking it up, returning to material right before it fades, explaining what you learned until the gaps become impossible to hide from yourself. None of these feel productive. They feel like effort without reward, until the day you realize your thinking has become faster, sharper, and capable of holding complexity that used to slip away. That is not a coincidence. That is what a trained memory feels like when it starts working for you. And Einstein had a habit that made everything Tesla built inside his mind actually mean something. One you have almost certainly heard misquoted. Habit 6. Explain it simply, or you don't understand it yet. Einstein was direct about this. If you cannot explain something in simple language, you do not understand it well enough. Not as a teaching philosophy, as a diagnostic tool he used on himself. When he couldn't explain an idea plainly, it told him exactly what he needed to know. There was a gap somewhere. Find it. Richard Feynman turned this into a 4-step process, now called the Feynman technique. Pick a concept. Write everything you know about it. Explain it as if you were teaching a 12-year-old. Find where your explanation breaks down. Go back, fill the gap, explain again. It sounds simple. It is also one of the most uncomfortable things you can do with your own knowledge, because it reveals very quickly that most of what you think you understand, you actually just recognize. Recognition is when something feels familiar. Understanding is when you can rebuild it from scratch. Most of what passes for learning produces the first one. You watch a video and nod. You read an article and feel informed. You are watching a video right now and nodding along. And if someone asked you to explain the last habit in your own words without looking at your notes, you would discover the gap almost immediately. That gap is not embarrassing. It is information. Find it, fill it, explain again. Darwin had a habit that protected the time and energy required to do all of this properly, and it is going to make you feel significantly better about how little you actually work. Habit 7. Protect your best hours ruthlessly. Charles Darwin fundamentally changed how humanity understands life on Earth. He did this working 4 hours a day, sometimes 5. Not 8, not 10, not 12, 4. The rest of his time was walking, resting, and observing nature. His colleagues found this baffling. Modern productivity culture would find it offensive. Neuroscience finds it completely logical. Executive function, your brain's reasoning and planning system, is not an unlimited resource. It depletes through use and recovers through rest the same way a muscle does. Except nobody brags about how little they let their muscles recover. Darwin knew which hours his mind worked best, and he protected them with the kind of seriousness most people reserve for nothing. No social obligations, no correspondence, no administrative tasks. Those hours belonged to thinking and nothing else. Everything else could wait, and apparently it could, because he still managed to change biology forever. Sleep is not lost time. It is when your brain consolidates what it learned and prepares the neural systems for the next day's work. The people who brag about how little they sleep are not optimizing their intelligence. They are slowly degrading it. The habit is simple and culturally almost impossible. Find your peak hours. Protect them completely. Do your hardest thinking then. Let everything else wait. Darwin did, and he seemed to manage. Edison had a completely different relationship with failure that made those protected hours worth having, and it will change how you think about every mistake you have made. Habit 8. Treat failure as data. Thomas Edison made approximately 10,000 attempts before producing a working incandescent light bulb. When a reporter asked how it felt to fail 10,000 times, Edison's answer has been quoted ever since. He hadn't failed 10,000 times. He had successfully identified 10,000 approaches that didn't work. Each one narrowed the possibility space. Each one eliminated what the solution was not. This was not a motivational reframe for public consumption. It was how Edison actually thought. Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck spent decades studying the difference between people who think this way and people who don't. People with a fixed view of their intelligence treat every difficult challenge as a threat. Not because they are weak, because they have decided their intelligence is a fixed quantity that a failed attempt might permanently reduce. Which means the safest strategy is to never attempt anything that might go wrong. The logical conclusion of this worldview is a life of carefully managed mediocrity. People with a growth view do the opposite. They treat difficulty as the mechanism, not the obstacle. Struggle is not evidence that something is wrong with them. It is evidence that something is being built. The habit is to change what failure means at a functional level. Not to feel better about it, to use it more precisely. Every failed attempt is a data point. What did it tell you? What did it eliminate? What does it suggest you try next? Edison filed over 1,000 patents, not despite 10,000 failed attempts, directly because of them. Newton's next habit is the one that gave Edison the conditions to fail that many times without giving up. And it is the one modern life has made hardest to protect. Habit 9. Use solitude as a cognitive tool. In 1665, the University of Cambridge closed due to a bubonic plague outbreak. Isaac Newton was 22 years old. He returned to his family farm in Woolsthorpe and spent the next 18 months almost entirely alone. In that period, he developed the foundational mathematics of calculus, formulated his theory of universal gravitation, and made significant advances in understanding the nature of light. 18 months. 3 of the most consequential scientific discoveries in human history. Historians call it his miracle year. It was not a miracle. It was what happens when an exceptional mind is given 18 months of uninterrupted silence. Your brain cannot do its deepest thinking and manage a social situation at the same time. Not because people are distracting, because the social brain and the deep thinking brain are drawing from the same cognitive budget, and social cognition is extraordinarily expensive. Think about how much mental energy goes into a single conversation, reading the other person, choosing your words, monitoring how you are coming across, deciding what not to say. That is, before you have thought a single original thought. Solitude is not an introvert preference. It is a cognitive environment. Newton did not discover gravity because an apple fell on his head. He discovered it because he was sitting alone in a garden with enough silence to actually think. The habit is to schedule solitude deliberately and treat it as seriously as any other cognitive resource. Because Curie's final habit only works if you have protected the mental space to practice it. Habit 10. Build a growth identity. Marie Curie was the first person in history to win Nobel Prizes in two different scientific disciplines, physics in 1903, chemistry in 1911. She did this with inadequate funding, in a laboratory so radioactive that her notebooks are still kept in lead-lined boxes and require protective equipment to handle today, while being systematically dismissed by institutions that could not reconcile her results with their assumption that a woman was producing them. She continued anyway. The conditions didn't change. Her relationship with what she was capable of did. A belief that her capabilities were not a fixed endowment she had been given, they were a living system she was still developing. This is different from what we covered with Edison. Edison's habit was about how you relate to specific failures. Curie's habit is about how you see your own intelligence as a whole. One is tactical, the other is foundational, and the research on this distinction is not ambiguous. The growth identity does not just feel better, it changes what your brain actually does when it encounters difficulty. Not as a personality trait you either have or don't, as a relationship with your own mind that you build through practice. Every time you choose the harder problem, every time you stay with the discomfort of not knowing, every time you decide your ceiling is further away than it currently feels, you are building what Curie built. In conditions that would have justified stopping 100 times over, she didn't stop. Fearlessness had nothing to do with it. She had simply decided something most people never get around to deciding, that what she was capable of was not yet finished growing. Neither are you. Every habit on this list shares one thing. They all feel wrong at first. Silence feels unproductive. Struggle feels like failure. Solitude feels like isolation. But that discomfort is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that something is actually building. Your brain is not fixed. It never was. What you do next is the only proof that matters.